Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. Two, because I'm a fan of punk music. And three, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough for me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Eric Turkington, who is Vice President Growth at Rain, who are a pioneer in voice and conversational AI. Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Hey, Adrian. I'm doing well. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Now, so Eric, for the people that are not familiar with yourself and or the work that Rain do, can you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on your background and what you get up to?
Absolutely. So currently working at Rain, which, as you mentioned, works in the voice technology and conversational AI world. We've been doing that work for really the last 7 years or so, 7 or 8 years. I've been with Rain for the last 4. So effectively, we help big companies figure out what voice technology means to them and how their brands can take advantage of it, or how they can take advantage of voice tech operationally and in terms of how they run their businesses and how their employees work. So there's a really wide variety of use cases for how voice can be useful to people and to organizations. And Rain helps companies, our clients, to figure out those interesting use cases and to actually pursue them by designing and developing voice applications. So that's most of really what Rain has done in the last 7 or 8 years. And more recently, we've actually taken on a couple rounds of funding to build our own voice first product that we're going to be commercializing on our own as its own SaaS business model. So we can talk about that a bit later. But suffice to say, we've kind of had a front row seat to some really interesting innovation in the world of conversational AI and taken part in a lot of that. And my role within that mix is to help grow our business. And I wear a lot of hats, everything from business development to helping to direct a lot of our client engagements and shape the strategy that we bring to our clients, to helping us build our product roadmap for kind of the startup that we've hatched inside the company. Before coming to Rain, I did a lot of work in the consulting world and also public relations and communications. So I've kind of touched a lot of different aspects of product development and customer experience for that matter. Really excited to talk today.
Nice. So just let me go first of all, go back and say congratulations on the success of your new fundraising round. I know you can raise some money.
Thank you.
I think back in 2020 or something, but this new round is like 11 million kind of like dollars or something. And that's to accelerate your voice first productivity software that you kind of mentioned there. So I just want to say, I know those things are kind of pretty hard to get over the line. So, I doff my cap to you.
Thank you.
But the reason I asked you onto the podcast is because I haven't really explored sort of intelligent voice assistants much in the past. Mm-hmm. And because I know there was a big brouhaha about intelligent voice assistants a few years ago, with all sorts of brands developing skills on different intelligent voice platforms like Alexa and Siri and Cortana, and then the other sort of like 4-letter or 5-letter kind of like named sort of like platform. But I wanted to I wanted to speak to you because I wanted to, before we kind of get into some of the stuff that you're up to and kind of where we're at with all that, I wanted you to set the kind of context, and I wanted you to, if you could help me understand a little bit about the state of demand about intelligence
voice kind of platforms and things, and in terms of their reach, their use, their penetration, that type of thing, like for consumers and businesses, and what they're currently using them for? That's a long question, but hopefully you get the gist of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So I think big tech companies, like you mentioned, Amazon, Apple, and Google primarily, also to some degree, Microsoft and Samsung in their own ways, have been responsible for, I think, the mainstreaming of voice technology, and just the sheer amount of investment that they've been able to put into their voice assistants has been a boon to the field at large, where the actual quality of the foundational technologies within the sort of voice stack. So automatic speech recognition, natural language understanding, and text to speech or synthetic voice generation. Those have all been able to advance to a very, very high performance capability. And the cost of using those services has also come way down. So what's interesting is, the technology has been foundationally kind of developed, and there's still a long way to go, particularly on the natural language understanding challenge, where you're actually extracting meaning from an utterance and taking an action or carrying on a conversation with a human. That's still extremely difficult, and we can talk about why that is in a bit. But the very much basics of voice commands and processing those correctly, and having simple enough conversations have been made possible. And so now there's the consumer behavior side of things, which is how can we kind of habituate ourselves to talk to machines, which seems like it's intuitively natural, right? Where language is something we're all born with, and is the way that we inherently are created as humans. But speaking to computers is a behavior that we actually do need to learn. And so I think the large technology companies have been successful at actually breeding that behavior pretty broadly in the populace. So roughly, a third of at least households in the U.S., I think it's maybe 30 to 40%, have actually purchased and own a smart speaker in their home. When people think of voice technology, they typically conflate it with smart speakers because of just how prevalent those devices have become in our houses. And we probably overweight that side of the voice world, actually. But we also see a ton of voice users on mobile. So people that obviously have an inherent assistant on their phone, whether it's Siri or Google Assistant. Roughly, I think it's about half of mobile phone users, or just over half, are voice assistant users on that phone.
Is that like using kind of voice search, like kind of like call such and such a person, or
it could
search
be, yeah,
for this, that type of things?
Yeah, there's a lot of different use cases. It could be as simple as Siri call mom, which is something I do every Saturday, or Google, how much flour should I put into the pancakes, or whatever.
Right.
There's a gazillion different use cases, from using the actual core first party functionality of the phone, which is great thing that Siri and Google Assistant do very, very well, to actually executing knowledge searches, which is where Google really excels. So there's a broad range of things, but what's really interesting is that about a quarter of smartphone users are actually daily active users of those voice assistants. So that's a pretty sizable component, given that everybody these days has a smartphone. And so I think there's been a little bit of a plateau on smart speaker penetration, where there aren't that many new households that don't have one acquiring a new one. Right. But there is a deepening of, if you have a smart speaker in your house, chances are you've got multiple in multiple rooms. So that effectively means that your home can be kind of a, you've got these assistants ambiently around you to do whatever you want. And it starts to become a crutch, to the extent that, my house, obviously I'm a voice tech junkie, but, we've recently gone big on Google. And so our whole house and all of our smart devices are Google. And I started actually packaging a few of these up. I'm doing a hardware test in a garage in Michigan later this week, and I had to ship a bunch of my devices along with a bunch of hardware I bought. And my wife's panicking now because she doesn't have Google Assistant in our bedroom to manage the light, so she doesn't have the way of getting the time that she needs in the kitchen. And so it's kind of funny the reliance you find yourself having on these things. So yeah, I would say from a penetration perspective, it's gone pretty broad. A large portion of the populace, has and uses these assistants, whether it's on dedicated devices or on their phones. And in terms of the use cases, which I think was the second half of your question, they're quite broad. But I would say, utility is probably the biggest, where you're just doing very basic things, whether that's timers or managing things like making a phone call or things of that nature. That's just easy to do via voice command, but also search. The power to get knowledge through voice search in a hands-free capacity is actually pretty great. And the answers that you can get back from these assistants are getting better and better and better. And entertainment is another big one. There's a big voice gaming community out there. Voice is a part of a lot of different mainstream gaming interfaces as well. And so there's a ton of different use cases out there. Customer service is one that probably should be more advanced than it is, as anybody who's dealt with an IVR system on the phone can attest to. But yeah, there's also the sort of third-party marketplaces that at least Alexa and Google Assistant have made a priority, which means any sort of brand can bring their services to the table to be accessible as an application, just like they would have an app on the App Store. And that's been a sort of a double-edged sword. It's been extremely popular for brands to invest in having these experiences, but it's been very, very scattered in terms of the quality.
Right.
And so that's sort of been a tricky thing for consumers, because if they use one experience that is just really poorly designed and it's really difficult to actually design a good voice experience, then all of a sudden they sour on the notion of talking to a brand or getting service from a brand in that capacity. So it's been tricky to think about the role of expectations when there's such an uneven quality bar out there.
Yeah, I mean, because I know that's kind of something that you are kind of really kind of like zooming in on, as it were. These kind of like, I think we talked before, kind of like in setting up this podcast. I know that you're kind of like helping many kind of brands, and you can go to your kind of website, rain.agency, and sort of see all the kind of brands there. I mean, there's a lot of big brands there, and like big quotes, which is great. But I'm really interested to learn about how brands are not necessarily getting it wrong, but the ones that are getting it right and doing this branded virtual assistants. And because you were linking it to how they were using it to drive personalization and innovation, and personalization is a big deal in customer experience. So I guess my question was, first of all, what's the latest? And also, how is your prediction faring? Because I noticed in November 2020, you at Rain, you kind of predicted that custom-owned virtual assistants, OVAs, or I guess they might be the same as branded virtual BVAs, were the future of voice. And I wanted to know, we're a year and a half, 18 months into kind of like into that prediction. Like, how are you doing? So, what's the latest, and how are you doing on your prediction?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, it's good to hold my feet to the fire on that one. So that prediction was kind of based in the theme I was just talking about, where for brands to take advantage of voice, a lot of for many years the thought was, well, we have to jump on one of the big tech channels, right? We need to be a skill on Alexa or an action on Google, and that's the way we're going to get distribution for the voice application we build, because those are the devices that are shipping, into everyone's home. And then, slowly but surely, brands started to realize that that came with a lot of baggage, and there are a lot of challenges to sort of solely relying on that channel. I can just briefly describe what those are. I mean, the first is really the relegation of your brand, right? So you're always going to be, mentioned second after the main voice assistant that is the gateway to your voice app there. Hey G, talk to X brand, right?
Right.
And that's, that can't be understated, right? Because you're always going to be in that sort of that position of subservience in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also significant just top of mind limitations of how people can remember to find the app that you've built, and whether those voice assistants are actually going to direct people to your app. And they always are going to have a bias for their first party functionality, and may or may not choose to route a consumer who says, I want to relax. Is that going to be, are they going to serve up a relaxing song in response to that request? Or are they going to direct me to the meditation app that I just spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building on the platform, right? So those are the types of challenges that I think require brands to spend a lot of money to not just build a good voice app, but to promote it and to keep it top of mind so that users actually remember it's there and can become habitual users of it. And so, there's also limitations when it comes to the sort of creative and technical aspects of what you can do in as a third party. There's obviously standards and policies that these companies need to enforce, in how people build on their platforms. But in our experience, you can find lots of really frustrating dead ends where a certain way you want to process payments won't work, or a certain way that you want to manage deliveries won't work, or you can't have full creative control over the way you present your brand sonically in this experience. So long story short, the sort of boom that led to the proliferation of these marketplaces has kind of had a opposite reaction where brands are saying, what, maybe we can build our own voice assistants that live inside our own devices or our own digital properties, whether that's our apps or our website or even our call center. And we can reassert the same control that makes the big tech assistants actually work well for the big tech companies and provide them their customers a good experience. So this notion of custom owned assistants is really brands that are saying, what, we can select from available technologies and build voice assistants that are purpose built for our customers, which have wake words that are our brand, and which live inside our products and make our products better. And so I think that's sort of the thrust of that prediction. And I think we were a little bit early to this trend at Rain and back in 2020. This wasn't really the dominant theme in the voice dialogue at the time, but it certainly is now. And almost all the companies I've talked to, whether they provide tools for people to build voice apps, or whether they're similar companies like Rain that are helping brands to navigate this world, this is really the number one topic on brand minds right now. And there's some interesting data kind of bearing this out. So there was a great study that voicebot.ai did. They're a great voice trade publication, and they found that if you just look at mobile apps and the role of voice assistants in mobile apps, almost 70% of the customers that they surveyed were favorable toward voice inside of a mobile app, and there was only, I think, 4% who were negative on it, and that's a really, really big gap for something that's quite novel. And I think on the business side, a ton of executives have effectively validated that custom assistants are a great boon to customer experience in general. There was a study that Opus and SoundHound had done on this topic that I think it was about 83% of the executives that they polled felt that voice-enabled products or services actually improve the customer experience. And so that's a pretty overwhelming majority. So, you also can look at acquisitions in this space, which is really interesting. A lot of the sort of category leading companies in a wide range of industry verticals have started to make pretty bold acquisitions to bring voice capabilities inside their organization. Peloton recently bought a voice, maybe a year or two ago, bought a voice company called IQdo. They've now been releasing voice functionality into their products, so you can hands-free control your workout. Walmart bought a voice design tool to help build out their Ask Sam assistant, which is actually an employee-facing assistant. Sonos is coming out with its own voice assistant after having had Alexa and Google Assistant kind of riding shotgun on its devices for a long time. That they've sort of realized the importance of actually controlling their own assistant. So lots of leading category kind of companies here have started to embrace this, and it's certainly a an ambitious thing to do, to build your own voice assistant like this. It's not an easy undertaking or something that really can be dabbled with. I think to do this right, you really have to be all in. And that's why, companies like Bank of America have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars developing their proprietary assistant called Erica. Finance and banking is a huge category for this, because there's just so many functions that a mobile app, can only surface so many in its visual real estate. And if you just think about the sheer volume of things you might ask a bank teller to help you with, there's a similar affordance to asking a voice assistant. So I think the prediction overall is faring pretty well. To keep myself honest, I am surprised that there aren't more of these custom assistants out there in the world, and particularly inside mobile apps. I would have thought by now that would be a slightly more prevalent trend. But yeah, overall, I think the consumer data, the sort of the executive viewpoint, and the acquisitive behavior of category leaders, and a handful of these really interesting voice assistants that do exist, show that prediction was probably pretty spot on, and I think we're going to continue to see more of that.
And so, is it the because you mentioned a number of different channels there, but I just wanted to understand, is it the majority of the activity around brands embedding voice assistants into their mobile apps? Because I think that's kind of an interesting shift, because there was a time a few years ago where, if you like, digital real estate on your phone was at a premium, and people were downloading apps and then just going do what they need to do, and they go and delete. And then, right. But now it feels like, is it that the digital real estate landscape is not as tight as it was, as it were, because phones have got more kind of capacity, and therefore brands are going, actually now we can do stuff back. This is a big switch back to an app, and it's and is that where most of the activity is? Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think apps are such an important investment for many brands already. For many brands, they are the brand's business, and for many other brands, they support the brand's business. But if you take, for example, Pandora as a music company, they already they're going to be promoting their app no matter what. And similarly, even within finance, right? If it's U.S. Bank or Bank of America, I think apps are never going to be eliminated or irrelevant in many brands' universes. So they're a very natural place to think of putting a voice assistant, particularly because that's often the point of meeting the customer where they are in terms of delivering service, right? Right. And so absolutely, there's a sort of I think a consumer backlash against having 100 apps on a phone and they only use 15 or 20 regularly or something like that. But that I think people are not creating their apps as voice assistant vehicles, but rather they're considering voice assistants inside their apps because those apps are extremely important to them as points of service.
Right. So it's an extension of, rather than just kind of like the main play in many ways.
Yeah. And I would also say that, apps are pretty undifferentiated these days in terms of their UI patterns. And, it's kind of an interesting thing, right? Like whenever we see a significant change to a UI of an app, we have this initial, feeling of confusion or even revulsion or betrayal, like where I was used to the old way it looked, and what is this new? I'm not familiar with this, and I need to use this to order my dinner or whatever it is. And then slowly but surely we become acclimated to these changes, and we couldn't imagine the app looking any other way, right? And it's almost the same way that you could think about Facebook and its news feed, where everybody was revolting about it, and then it became this. Of course, it's the news feed. That's what Facebook is. And so there's an interesting reaction people have to novelty in the apps that they use day in day out, and right now, there just isn't a whole lot of novelty in general in the app experience. And I think voice is an interesting opportunity where it actually is a relatively novel thing still, even though some big brands are doing this to add, it's not a consumer expectation. So it's actually an interesting way of thinking about differentiating an app and adding sort of a surprise and delight component to it, at least on that first few uses. Yeah. And then ideally from there becomes sort of more habituated and more of an expectation and more of just a utility.
Right. And because I wanted to ask also about, because, I mean, we talked about kind of like, I mentioned personalization, and brands are using these virtual assistants to drive personalization, innovation, and all those different things, and as you said, differentiate themselves. But I also kind of like wonder about that whole personalization thing and around using their own apps, their own kind of like, I feel like, channels, their own technology. And is there part of that drive? Is it also about controlling the data, because you're not actually like subordinated to the main brand, and therefore you've got access to that first party data, because we know all this, the data landscape's kind of changing, kind of yada yada sort of thing. And it's like, and therefore people are going, actually, we need that data ourselves. We can't be going, please, sir, can I have my data type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have mentioned that earlier, actually, because it's a huge point. But yeah, I think brands controlling their data has a couple different facets here. The first thing is not sharing their data with big tech, which can be somewhat of a pain point for many brands who may feel like they're being competitive with big tech now and have a high probability of being competitive down the road. So there's going to be different sensitivities to the data sharing thing for a lot of different brands, depending on which tech players are involved. But as a general rule, data is widely recognized as kind of the new oil, if you will, or the thing that the more that you can amass of it, especially as regards your consumers, the better your ability to deliver good customer experience will be, or just to simply inform your own product strategy. So I do think that having control over the data that you generate and not sharing that with big tech is absolutely a huge competitive advantage for a lot of brands, especially retailers or consumer electronics companies that are manufacturing products that are potentially competing with big tech, and have this uneasy relationship with them, like the Sonos example I mentioned. But there's also the granularity of the data. So data sort of stewardship is one thing, but the granularity of data you can glean from a custom voice assistant as opposed to from a third-party app on a big tech assistant is substantial. You can effectively make your own rules with regard to how you process consumer utterances, right? And the are you going to be actually listening for things like sentiment and running that audio through some sort of a sentiment analysis engine, where you could not do anything similar on a big tech assistant, which obviously starts to open questions of privacy.
Well, that's what I was going about to ask, because there was a big thing kind of like a few years ago, and people were talking about latent, is it the right word? Kind of like the latent listening of these, because almost like the smart speakers, to be effective, they always have to be on and they always have to be listening. And if they're always listening, then they're always active. And then there was this thing that going on around, well, if they're always listening, then they're sort of always having to record, because that's just the way the kind of technology kind of works, because you record and then you can transcribe and then you can analyze and so on and so forth. I mean, that was the thing I was thinking about. Is like going, because this is a personalization, and then that sort of the privacy preferences and all that type of stuff. I mean, where are brands on that? Because it's a bit of a minefield.
Yeah, it's really interesting that I think there's so much pervasive consumer misunderstanding about how voice assistants work with regard to listening and privacy. It's so funny. I was on a social media app the other day and just saw this thread about this exact topic about, people we're all trying to weigh in on whether, somebody should have a smart speaker in their home and whether it was listening to them and whether it was the government or big tech listening to them and how it all worked. And there was about 80 bad responses. And one person said, actually, hey, I work in the speech technology industry and here's how it works. Right. And I was the only person that made a lot of sense on this. And so, just briefly in terms of how the actual process of listening works here, and then
can I say thank you in advance as well, because it's going to clear this up for kind of like a bunch of kind of like people, and maybe even kind of myself. I don't really use a lot of smart sort of speakers, but actually it's good to be informed about this stuff.
Totally, and it's perfectly natural to have to have an illusion about how this works, and I think that the reason that there's a lot that feeds into the misperception in terms of our sense of how the sort of industrial ad complex works, and the notion of surveillance in general in capitalism. So basically, if you have, whether it's your phone or your smart speaker with a microphone, it is always listening for its wake word, which is the specific phrase that makes that basically triggers it to listen to your speech, and then take that speech and parse it into text, and then process that text and give you a response back. So there's actually a vocal activity detection layer that even is before the wake word. So it's literally listening. Is somebody speaking, or is the wind rustling the leaves, right? Or is there, some other sound going on? So if it actually detects vocal activity, somebody is speaking, then it says, okay, did somebody speak, Alexa? Or, hey, I'm not going to say the phrase or I'll start triggering my devices. But then if it hears that, then it will effectively start listening to what you say. And then it will basically, again, take your speech to text and then pass that text to the cloud and process it, and then take an action or deliver a response back. There's no way it could actually record all the time, all the time, because that would create massive volumes of data, which would basically slow down your internet to the point where it wouldn't work, or your device itself would have to have a million terabytes locally to store it. So there's just no possible way that's what's happening, and it's not in the interest of the tech companies to do that either. So of course there are false invocations, and if you go to check your history on any of your smart assistants, you can certainly listen to some funny things that it picked up when it thought you had said the wake word. But you can also delete those really easily. And a lot of controversy has also come about when people heard that humans were actually annotating some of these recordings, and in my view, that's happening on an anonymized basis, and it's really necessary to improve the quality of natural language understanding. Without some form of manual curation, you can't solely rely on machine learning currently to optimize that. So I think it is a necessary part of making the technology better. And the thing most people bring up is, I was talking to my neighbor about, weed killer for my yard, and all of a sudden, I got an ad about it, and people assume that the causal connection was the speaker somehow, but the causal connection was most likely that you searched for it. So,
and you didn't quite remember.
We have this interesting desire to sort of foist all of our privacy concerns onto voice assistants, because audio is salient, and we have this romanticized notion of surveillance, and they're listening to us, and it's part of pop culture in a sense. But really, you should be much more concerned about the device in your pocket and what it's doing with all of your searches if you're concerned about privacy, because that's really, I think, where the vast majority of hyper-personalized kind of ad-driven targeting happens. When you think about the branded context here, people have a very different calculus for assessing a brand's sort of motives and risks when is my coffee company that is Nespresso really trying to do anything other than get me to drink more coffee? Probably not. But is Amazon trying to do a lot of other things to my behavior? Yes, probably so. So I think there's a sort of an unequal risk assessment that consumers, or at least savvy consumers, would apply to brands that are doing a much more limited service for them as compared to big tech, which has, I think, a multitude of interests, and therefore, perhaps is a little bit less trustworthy with the same data. So I think the consumer value exchange is a little bit different in that regard, which makes custom assistants more attractive and perhaps gives a bit more rope to companies that want to really dial up the personalization and deal with whatever potential consequences come with gathering and using more data to deliver what they think is a better experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And I guess one thing I would kind of say is going, if somebody kind of feels that way, but or has concerns that way about some of those issues, then all I would say to kind of brands is they just need to probably be a bit more explicit and upfront about kind of what they do and how they do it. So, for example, you mentioned Pandora, and maybe it'd be a case of hey, Pandora, how do you use my data? And then they have this, here's what we do, and this is blah, 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 blah. So we got you on this, that type of kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that sort of proactive disclosure, and in that sense, reactive disclosure, just having having an intent built for how is your data managed is a very smart thing for any company to do if they're building a voice assistant. Absolutely. I think that's critical to building trust. And I think generally when consumers understand the value exchange and when it's made transparent, they tend to be okay with it. And there's so many examples of that in the world, from Gmail to you
Well,
name it.
I think that kind of that sort of thing holds across all sorts of life, whether it's in your personal life, commercial life, political life, whatever. If people can be open and transparent, and then can be held to account, and there's a common understanding of what's kind of going on, you like when people generally feel comfortable with that. Because if there's an asymmetry, that's where kind of the anxiety can, and questions can creep in.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, to take a brand that I spend a lot of time with as an example, Spotify, who also has a very mature voice strategy and voice assistant inside their app. They are a great company that knows me so well because they're obviously looking at what I'm listening to and deriving really helpful playlists for me that save me time, because it's genius. It's just like, oh yes, this is a perfect mix for today because you've gathered all of my listening behavior over the last month and basically distilled it into what I'm very likely to want to hear. So I think it's great that they do that and kind of reinforce preference, but they also have the flip side, which is taste breakers, they call it, which is effectively give me something that I wouldn't normally listen to, and that's, I think, a nice kind of algorithmic pushback on the prevailing winds of giving you more of what you listened to previously or watched previously, which is the way that technology companies typically work.
Yeah. And so is the opportunity only in the B2B sort of space? I mean, because you also mentioned sort of like business to employee and business to business, because I was thinking about business to business and thinking about this idea that you mentioned, the hands-free help sort of thing. And I was thinking,
yeah,
it feels like kind of like, oh, hands-free. Yeah, there's a lot of hands-free potential in that sort of either business to employee or business to business sort of space.
Absolutely. And that's what our kind of fundraising has been predicated on, is really delivering voice solutions for what we call the deskless workforce, which is, roughly 80% of the global workforce are people who are not tethered to a desk and a computer, but rather are out performing some work, oftentimes with their hands and oftentimes very skilled trades. What's really powerful for them is the ability to deliver a data point or retrieve a data point whenever they want to in their workflow, just by asking or telling. And unfortunately, the deskless workforce overall it's not a monolith. There's a gazillion different professions that comprise it, but have been very under served by technology. And the amount of enterprise software that supports kind of white collar workers is far outpacing it. And I think the clunkiness of a lot of the solutions that they have to deal with, whether they're mobile apps they're using or whether they're legacy computers, is just insufficient. And so if you think about the affordances of voice, the speed of input is really voice's kind of fastball, if you will, 3 times faster, at least in English language, than typing. And yeah, like you said, the affordance of being able to do it hands-free and eyes up is pretty transformational. So that's why we're kind of focused on this group, and there's a really broad array of different potential end users. So if you think about somebody at a fast food chain or quick service restaurant, who's third day on the job and is put into a new situation where they have to learn how to use a new fryer or something like that, how are they're going to get an answer? They could actually just ask, oh, how long do I cook the chicken for? And they get an answer, as opposed to going and consulting a printed manual or asking a colleague who's doing something else. And so those sorts of knowledge assistance use cases, I think, are pretty profound if you think about that information just being an utterance away, especially if you're already wearing a headset to do that workflow. But this has also been a very mature space in the world of logistics. If you think about warehouses, and there's a lot of very streamlined, kind of purpose-built, picking voice picking solutions that help guide people to the next package in their workflow and confirm that they've taken it where it needs to go. So there's I think a long heritage of voice being used in that capacity, but a very, very nascent exploration of voice for things like quick service restaurants, or some of the areas that we're looking at now in particular, which is like automotive technicians who've got dirty hands. They've got their hands, on wrenches, and time is money in these businesses because they're often, flat rate. And so the faster they can do their job, the more money they make. And so if we can literally shave seconds off of, needing to find, the torque spec for the wheel nuts, then we're actually, the seconds compound because of the volume of work that these workers do. And that really adds up to, more money in their pocket. And so I think what we're trying to really do there is leverage what voice is great at, which is, the ability to naturally ask a question in a domain that has a natural understanding model that actually gets you and knows the jargon that you use. Much like professional would, and then can actually just deliver you that data point back, so you can execute your work and move on. So I think it's a huge space, and there's a lot of investment flowing into this, not just at Rain, but in a lot of companies that are getting funded to support that. Healthcare is another really big one.
Well, I think it's what's really useful and what's really interesting about all of those sort of things is all of that knowledge is generally codified anyway. As you say, kind of instruction manuals and everything else, is to be able to take it, it's generally all already digital, and then going to make it accessible from basically a voice, I guess, intelligent voice search kind of engine.
Exactly.
And then you can kind of read it back, so you can search it, find the kind of right question, and then basically kind of read it back. So it's basically your conduit for that knowledge. You're making that kind of knowledge so much more accessible rather than having to go and then flick through something, trying to find the right sort of thing.
Precisely, yeah. It's kind of funny. There's sort of a truth in the world of voice that, like, I think is increasingly getting understood, which is mastering a knowledge base and mastering data for voice search is probably the hardest thing to get right. And it's the most important foundational aspect of success in voice is you need to master your data for voice-enabled lookup. And then the voice almost becomes the easy part because you're literally just, capturing what somebody said and then running it through your kind of ontology of meaning in your particular universe, and the sort of taxonomy of relationships between things to get the right answer. And when it works like that, it feels like magic. But that's because essentially you've optimized your corpus of data to receive those types of natural language queries and to return the right answer. And so doing well in voice is really about doing well with data, especially in those knowledge retrieval kind of use cases. And that's been a big eye opener for us in the last couple of years, where we're spending a lot more time feeling like a data company than we are a voice company sometimes, because that's really the hard enabling aspect of it.
But that could also kind of feels like I think it was that you mentioned the natural language understanding, and how the AI is taking some big leaps forward with the kind of development of new kind of like sort of like training data and databases and all these different things. It's kind of being able to allow people to move from just straight NLP to NLU, and then now the kind of, I guess, the next gen is this kind of next NLG, as it were, and that's kind of where we're kind of all going, and how that's being facilitated by the development of these new kind of, I can't remember, was it GPT-3 or something? Is that right? Or
yeah.
Or and the like sort of thing. They're not just GPT-3, but there's other ones out there that are kind of things. And I'm getting kind of a bit nerdy and technical with this as well.
Yeah. No, GPT-3 is really exciting as a natural language generation tool that is coming out of the OpenAI initiative that Elon Musk and others founded. And there was a huge piece in the New York Times actually about this maybe a couple months ago that I think Stephen Johnson wrote. And there's a lot of controversy about just how impressive GPT-3 should be. And people who are computational linguists have been saying, we're wowed by this, but it's essentially just parroting back, what we teach it. And it's really just a linguistic mirror on the data that it ingests, and therefore should we be so impressed, that
Right.
it can basically, mimic back what it heard. And I tend to think it is quite impressive myself in terms of its summarization capabilities, and that's very, very useful and has great commercial applications. I think some of the creative outputs of it are also quite interesting. If we start to think about the role of machine intelligence, as art, and whether or not we should be treating it on equal footing with humans, there's a lot of ethical challenges inherent there. But
yeah, let's not go down that rabbit hole. We'll be here for days.
Exactly.
But Eric, just to make this kind of like real, for it to come to life. You talked about a bunch of different things, but do you maybe have an example of like a brand that you've worked with? You go like, this is the challenge. They did this, and this is kind of what's happened. Just to kind of like go paint the picture. Go like, here's what possible looks like.
Yeah, for sure. I can give you a couple of examples. So maybe starting with one that is actually in the more marketing focused realm, which actually did take advantage of a big tech assistant, but I think did so in a really clever way. So we were working with Nike a couple of years ago to help them launch a new sneaker that they've been working on called the Adapt BB. And that was the self-lacing sneaker from Back to the Future. And they were interested in effectively a really innovative way to get that sneaker launched and to drive interest in it. And what we recommended was actually tapping into the power of voice for impulse and the ability to act on an impulse. So we did a broadcast integration with an NBA game, Lakers Celtics, and at the halftime, effectively, there was a call to action that you could get this shoe for the first time ever just by asking Google Assistant. And so for all of those people we talked about earlier who have either an Android phone or a smart speaker in their house, which is a large swath of the population, all you needed to say was, "Hey, G, tell Nike I want those shoes." And then all of a sudden we basically sold out of them in less than 6 minutes. And so I think there's a tremendous power of just the ability to not even have to take your phone out to be able to act on an impulse. And this sort of is a good example of what we typically call at Rain system thinking, where there's an understanding of the sort of ecosystem that surrounds a consumer to be able to be primed with messaging, leading up to this event, and then to actually use the broadcast integration to deliver the utterance that they needed to say, and then to actually be able to process the e-commerce from those users that were actually buying shoes with their voice, just based on that quick impulse, was actually a pretty neat trick. So there's a real business metric there. It's not just the novelty of having done this by a voice that befitted the shoe, but also the business result of just how quickly they were able to drive those sales. So that's just one example in kind of the marketing realm. I think in more the employee-facing realm, we're working with a large tool brand right now. I can't go into too much depth, but if you think about all the different details that you need to keep on top of if you're a general contractor or you're working a job site. And if you think about the challenges in, converting units from one thing to another, or, remembering what's on the list to buy, or what did I already buy, right. The ability to basically query a voice assistant that keeps track of all these different running lists and is able to do those calculations and conversions for you on the fly. While you're again juggling your 2x4s or in the midst of performing your actual construction work, that's a pretty transformational type of a hands-free thing to have. So there's a lot of work that's happening in that realm right now at Rain, where we're thinking about how these sort of skilled professionals can get the assistance they need, and really derive a lot of value from those kind of custom domain knowledge areas that we're able to build out and make voice searchable. So yeah, those are just a couple examples, but nice. You'll probably encounter a lot more in your daily life as you whether it's ordering at the drive-through through an automated voice assistant, or queuing up your next tune on your service of choice.
Nice. So that's super interesting, Eric. So thank you for kind of sharing that with me, and actually kind of giving us a sense of the kind of like the different domains. There's B2C and there's B2B and then there's B2E, and it's like they're all very separate sort of like use cases and domains, as it were. And that's really interesting. And hopefully that's whetted some people's, or give people some food for thought, as it were. But it's like, before we move on, is there anything that else you'd like to add or highlight that we've missed out before I'll ask you to step back and peer into your crystal ball?
Yeah, I mean, I think to think about the role of the pandemic actually on the voice industry is interesting, and maybe where things go from here. Initially when the pandemic was first taking place, I had a prediction that didn't really bear out, which was this, that people were going to really flock to voice technology out of a health concern for not wanting to touch surfaces.
Right.
And back then, when our understanding was, I think, rather limited about how COVID spread, people thought there was sort of a tactile nature to it. And we've since learned that that's very, very small in terms of the risk. And so, I was predicting voice enabled elevators, and that every kiosk that you interacted with previously with touch would be voice enabled, and that didn't really happen. There were some instances of that being the case, and I think there was still sort of a consumer concern about touch in the wild. But I thought retail was going to be much more readily adopting voice solutions than they were, to help with people with wayfinding and things like that. That didn't really pan out, but what did happen is usage of voice went way up at home. And I think our kind of familiarity with the interface only increased. And one other thing was that people weren't on the road as much. And so one other thing that I think is huge for voice is the car. And we haven't really talked about that today, but if you just think about the way that work has been upended by voice technology, and the commute, right? Everyone used to have a fairly long commute, and that to me is a pivotal time for voice computing, whether that's work related, or I'm accessing information about my day, or I'm even able to hear a briefing or read a document through text to speech. That just hasn't really come to fruition quite yet. And I think that's the next frontier, really, is our cars are going to be the most salient places for voice experiences moving forward. And you see a race to embed big tech voice assistants, but also you see a lot of car companies going their own way. Mercedes built its own voice assistant, working with a company called Houndify, and Hyundai has done something similar. So cars are, I think, going to be the most interesting, especially as we think about autonomous vehicles not far around the corner. If you don't have to drive the car, then it becomes just a hub for so many other things. And whether that's entertainment or whether that's, doing work, I think, it's going to be a ways before autonomous vehicles are the norm. And until then, I think the ability to do things in the car just by voice, whether it's through Alexa or through a custom assistant, is going to be huge for consumers, and I think big for business too. And monetizing that commute is going to be a really fascinating thing as people start to get more back into the office.
Nice. That's fascinating. So it expands takes the whole are you on hands-free, as it were, in the car idea to like a different level. Yeah, like going hands-free. It's not just about talking, kind of receiving can be hands-free, but it's always like, what could you do hands-free when you enable this kind of functionality? So that's that's fascinating.
Absolutely.
So, but if I was to say to you, that's brilliant. You're like, blimey, my head's kind of exploding with kind of what you could do. But if I was to say to you, if it asked you to boil it down, and if somebody was thinking about going, they want to think about intelligent voice assistants and how they can use it to improve their customer and maybe employee kind of like experience, then what would be your best advice in terms of do this first? What would it be? Yeah,
I mean, I think the most important thing is actually having a strategy for what you want to achieve short-term and long-term with it. Too many companies, I think, have just taken a stance toward emerging technology where it's just experiment in the absence of really a strong bought-in plan for what those experiments should teach, and where some measure of failure is acceptable. So I think having that long-term vision, knowing that like voice technology is not going away, and there's just no universe where it possibly will, just because of big tech's investment in it. So if you don't have a strategy for it long term, then you're going to be losing out on giving your consumers some sort of a convenience or some sort of a value add that your competitive brand will deliver. So I think stepping back and actually understanding the technology beyond kind of that surface level, doing experiments that are grounded in a big picture vision, and not being afraid to try things, I think are the most important things that business leaders can do right now. And
nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Eric, I think that applies to pretty much kind of everything, is make sure you understand kind of what you want to do and why you want to do it before you do anything. Because a lot of people are doing lots of stuff without any idea of kind of what they want to try and do and why they were trying to do it, as it were. So
absolutely,
there's a lot of fumbling around in the dark.
It's true. It's a cliched thing to say have a strategy, but it's harder in practice than it is in theory, I would say.
Yeah, no, completely. So thank you for that. So before we can we go, I wanted to ask you just couple of very quick questions, because, and these are questions I've been asking at the end of these interviews on an ongoing basis for the last kind of 2-3 years, kind of ever since I published Punk CX, and then lastly kind of with Punk XL. And so the first question is, it's like a word association question. Is a bit like, what 1 or 2 words would you use to describe a more punk approach to customer experience?
Say bravery. The notion of taking a risk.
Yeah.
And to some extent that's what you do when you innovate, right? And I would put voice technology in that category, right? It's a brave choice to try to do something hard. And to introduce something novel. But I think those choices can pay off over time. So I think Punk CX, mentality feels like a brave one, and one that's willing to challenge convention.
Nice. I like it. And so the second question, and this relates to more the Punk XL, which is the follow-up to Punk CX, and it talks about a broader sort of idea around what does experienced leadership look like? Because we talk about, it's built on this idea that it's no longer sufficient to talk about customer experience in isolation. You have to think about things in an integrated, holistic, systemic sort of way. But we also talk about brand leadership, market leadership, technological leadership, all of these different things, but we don't talk about experience leadership. And I wondered on that, and that's what the book muses on, as it were, and I think we need to start. And so what company or brand do you think is an experienced leader, and why? Like, who's setting the bar? Who's kind of already kind of there?
Yeah, man, I hate to go back to another example that we talked about earlier, but I do feel like Spotify has done a tremendous job of that in terms of the way that they've just developed an incredible product that makes the experience of consuming music more than you thought it might be. And I think back to the different. I think I'm obviously a music nerd here, but I think a lot about the evolution of formats and how that influences an experience. From whether it's records to mixtapes to CDs and now the digital music realm. I think making abundance navigable is what Spotify does so well, that I think so many other streaming services, especially in the video world, do very poorly. Where there's there's an iceberg of content, and you really only ever see the top of it. But I think Spotify's ability to kind of plumb the depths of the musical world and kind of curate that and make it accessible to you, and obviously voice search plays a key role in my experience there, but I think that's been a real visionary thing that they've done is really make the totality of music available, in a multitude of ways, in a value added way as well. So
nice.
I feel like they're definitely an experienced leader.
Awesome, that's a great example. Thank you very much, Eric. And so, Eric, that's all I have for today, and I just want to say I learned some stuff. So, which is kind of great, because I wanted to kind of like get genned up on that, on this kind of space, because I haven't really explored it on the podcast before. So just want to say One, again, congratulations on the recent fundraise. That's brilliant. That'll allow you to kind of do even more work in this sort of space, which is brilliant. And just thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your experience with us today. That's been awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.